there's two different things you're dealing with when you talk about globalism. And, you always have the contrast of the two things. And one of them is that the idealized vision that the globalists themselves have of what it is. And so, if you talk to someone who supports the EU or supports the UN or supports any transnational body, they think that they are on the right side of history and they think they're doing the good thing. And the idealized image they're given is that, modern communications, modern trade, modern policy, and the problems that the modern world faces are all dealt with better on a transnational level than on a national level. And they're told that, if we're going to deal with climate change, if we're going to deal with poverty around the globe, if we're going to generally improve people's lives everywhere, we have to have transnational bodies and we have to have transnational solutions. If we want to stop nations fighting each other, we have to have a body like the UN that goes in and says, this is the international rule of law. These are the values by which you'll abide, and every nation is subject to them. And that's all stuff that developed after World War II, and and had the kind of moral backing of the fight against Nazism, for example, and then the kind of Cold War and the fight against communism. This idea that we have this set of shared values that transnational bodies are going to be the custodians of, and they're better custodians of it than national governments are, because you can't trust national governments. They might throw up a Hitler, they might throw up a Stalin. The empathy for the other overrides any kind of compassion or empathy or awareness of what's happening to your existing citizens, what's happening to the people that your government is supposed to actually protect.
Right.
And in England, this has gone on for a long time because England has been one of the biggest victims of globalization on the planet. The English white working class have been more mistreated than almost anyone else you can think of, because this kind of gang rape of their children that was endorsed by the political system for decades. It's not happened. Thankfully, we've not seen the scale of that elsewhere. But I suspect there's a fair bit of it going on in France, for example, at the moment. But with their Muslim population. But we haven't seen the same scale in elsewhere. I mean, grooming gang it became the standard word, but it's really it's a way of describing it that is too polite, and that exists to be too polite as well. That was, deliberately created to downplay what was happening, because these were child rape gangs and they were on an industrial scale, and they had thousands upon thousands of victims. Potentially up to 1 million victims over 30 years. And, and that's the industrial scale of the gang rape and the torture and the abuse of almost exclusively, there were some Sikh victims, but almost exclusively white victims who were betrayed, abandoned, completely ignored by the British ruling class and the British establishment, by British police, by British judges, by British politicians, because the victims were white working class and the abusers were mainly Pakistani descended, obviously brown skinned rapists. And the clear fact is that the worst, the most horrific racism in British history, with the largest number of victims and the most disgusting crimes, is that fairly recent industrial scale, still going on, rape of white children by immigrant communities.
I'm pleased to have on my show today Daniel Jupp. He is the author of The Gates of Hell, which could also be called The Hell of Gates, this case, Bill Gates, and some of the hells he's brought on. He's not quite living in hell. He's living in paradise, the UK, which is ruled by the demons of hell.
Yeah, it's a Marxist paradise, in which case it's, just like hell.
Yeah. So you're working on a book which it's called F asterisk CK the Planet. Tell us the name of that, the title, how that came about.
Well, the title is probably the one bit of the book that isn't me, because that was recommended by the publishers. We had a different original title, but we wanted something punchy and that people would remember. And it's F the Planet is certainly that, but it's also like subtitled How to Resist the Great Reset. So it's about globalism, and it's about how you as an ordinary citizen can respond to globalism. The kind of tactics and measures you can take to protect yourself, really. Because I think people living under a globalist government, and America experienced this in the Biden period, and the UK is experiencing it now under the Starmer government. People living under a globalist rulership, if you're in any way a kind of ordinary person with ordinary values and hopes and dreams and aspirations, you're almost like you're living in conquered territory. And you're bombarded with things that don't make any sense. You're dealing with insane policies and just a kind of continual diminution of the things that you think are your rights, and a constant attack on your values as well. So it's about how you deal with that and how you respond to that. The F the Planet title as well is really, we have this kind of contrast of constantly being told that we have to care about the planet. That's obviously what's pushed with the green agenda, but none of the leaders doing this care about our world. It's their planet, it's their ideas, and we're not allowed to have our views and our ideas. And we've got more and more censorship to deal with, and we've got less and less liberty that we inherited has been, more and more of it has been taken away from us. So it's about preserving your world, your family, your values, your identity, in the face of globalist rule.
So I had a patient amongst my thousands of patients over decades. I had this one patient. He was an older guy, and I swear he came in just to debate. He had some illnesses, but he came in far more frequently, and he brought his wife in, and he was a one world government guy. And I hadn't heard of that. This is back probably 30 years ago. He was coming in, and he's since left this mortal coil. He's left this one Earth and the globe and so forth. Is he a globalist? What is a globalist? The debate that I had. I was there to treat his various symptoms and whatnot. But he would be itching for like a fight with me, and I basically said, well, look, there's a competition for ideas that, in order to have kind of the best ideas come up, you need to have them kind of rub up against each other. And so, and this one global government, you're presuming it's going to be somebody like you running it with your best interest. But it is a hard thing to kind of fathom, amongst all the things difficult to predict, the future is the hardest. And when somebody has this ultimate control over everybody, is it going to be benign? Almost by definition, can it be? And, you have the possibility where you are in the UK of maybe overturning the current government you don't like, but it's harder without some external pressures and some external opinions and so forth. So I guess the question would be, what is globalism? Is it this one world government ultimately? And is it, in a sense, kind of like Revenge of the Nerds? People who didn't don't have the best ideas, don't get the girls in high school. Kind of the this kind of what you were talking about today in an article I'll show, kind of like the losers write the story, write the narrative, and are we suffering because of people's, kind of like Foucault, having his own issues on a gross level, but being able to affect the world far beyond that, and I was, studying John Money lately, same kind of thing, people with huge problems, kind of like changing the world on the outside, perversely in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different things you're dealing with when you talk about globalism, and you always have the contrast of the two things, and one of them is that the idealized vision that the globalists themselves have of what it is. And so if you talk to someone who supports the EU or supports the UN or supports any transnational body, they think that they are on the right side of history and they think they're doing the good thing. And the idealized image they're given is that, modern communications, modern trade, modern policy, and the problems that the modern world faces are all dealt with better on a transnational level than on a national level. And they're told that, if we're going to deal with climate change, if we're going to deal with poverty around the globe, if we're going to generally improve people's lives everywhere, we have to have transnational bodies and we have to have transnational solutions. If we want to stop nations fighting each other, we have to have a body like the UN that goes in and says, this is the international rule of law. These are the values by which you'll abide, and every nation is subject to them. And that's all stuff that developed after World War II, and and had the kind of moral backing of the fight against Nazism, for example, and then the kind of Cold War and the fight against communism. This idea that we have this set of shared values that transnational bodies are going to be the custodians of, and they're better custodians of it than national governments are, because you can't trust national governments. They might throw up a Hitler, they might throw up a Stalin. It's much better if these things are ordered on a transnational level, and even kind of simple minor things like aviation rules or like shipping rules. You need a global system for that. And there's some element of truth in that, and most ordinary people wouldn't object to there being international aviation guidelines, for example. There's a pragmatic basis to some of it, but the idea that all of that is needed, and it's needed more than national governments, is the root of globalism. And it soon becomes a means for the most corrupt and the most malign to ignore what their actual populations want. So, if you want to be very, very corrupt in the US or the UK or Australia, you want to take power away from your own people, and especially the power to stop you doing what you want to do. And one route of doing that is to invest the power in a transnational body. So you take the power away from your own populace. You make sure it can never be voted against again in an election by transferring that power to a transnational body like the UN or like the World Health Organization. And then you have your career as a politician in your own home nation, but you're not really serving the interests of your home nation at all. And what we've seen come out of the changes that have happened since Trump was elected is it's exposing this vast international network, because it's not just the Democrats in the US. Their British equivalents are doing the same. Their Australian and Canadian equivalents do the same. Globalists everywhere take power away from the people, take power away from their own nation state, and invest it elsewhere. And they're stealing money as they do this as well. They're diverting the funding of the nation state, and they're saying, well, actually, I believe it should go to this project in Africa, or I believe it should go to, and I don't really want I believe passionately in lesbian daycare centres in Somalia, and that's where the money's going. Whether or not, some US voter in Michigan or somewhere else or Nebraska wants that, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to appropriate the funds. We're going to build up the debt. We're going to kick back some of it to ourselves, because that's what always happens as well. And we're going to do all this without you having much of a say or knowledge over it. And that's what globalism is, really, because, in my book, I talk about, at the end, I have an appendix where I list globalist institutions, things like the Atlantic Council, or things like the World Economic Forum. All of these things were put in place with supposedly noble intentions of fostering good relations between different nations, and of encouraging peace, encouraging security, and encouraging prosperity. But all of them become a huge racket for the most corrupt people within a nation state, because they can say, we're funding all these wonderful good things, don't look at where the money goes. Oh, some of it's going to us.
Yeah.
And that's where all of these NGOs come from, and I list a large number of them in my book, F the Planet, and they're in there, and all of those will be the kind of organisations that were receiving money from USAID, and the kind of billions and billions of dollars of US debt and waste that's been exposed now. But this is happening in every Western nation. This is what globalist governance does. It's partly a massive financial corruption scheme, yes, and it's partly a kind of ideological drive towards a single world government that's, of course, enacting globalist ideas and globalist theories.
Yeah. So, the expression "more leeches," the surgeons back in the day didn't have that many tools to fix people. Getting everything back to my medical career here, and so every now and then they'd figure out, you had kind of evil circulating within you, or bad humors and so forth, and they'd apply leeches to literally suck these things out of you, and of course that generally made people feeble and worse. And they decided the disease was kind of taking over more, and so the answer was to get more leeches. It seems like, and then you'd eventually die from that because you had no active, bloodstream and so forth. It seems like there's kind of a more leeches aspect of this. The leeches are doing pretty well by this.
Yeah,
the surgeons might do okay, but the body politic is being bled out. So I'm going to stick with that analogy for now.
Yeah, and it's a good one, and it's kind of similar. What you're saying there is sort of a medical version of Elon Musk saying that they looked into what they found. At first, they thought it might be an apple with a worm in it, and they found that it was just a ball of worms. and that kind of metaphorical language is very, very accurate. And this is what happens. Because it's partly directed and malign and deliberate, and it's partly just the nature of an institution. Over time, an institution departs from its original founding principles, and it changes what it's there for. And eventually, the purpose of the institution becomes protecting the existence of the institution itself. And it happens with branches of federal government, and it happens with transnational bodies. That some of these things can be established with noble intent, but it's very difficult to keep that noble intent going when you can say, thousands of people can say, well, actually, I can draw a fat salary from this doing nothing. And I can send my kids to college, I can enrich myself, and nobody's noticing, because there's this above the door, there's this big kind of save the world label for everything that's going on. And you can point to that and you say, well, I'm saving the world, and as you do that, you believe it, And I'm sure some of the people who worked for USAID sincerely believe that they were saving the world and doing good, and that that kind of lesbian daycare center in Somalia is really going to change the world. Some of them believe it, but really, over time, it becomes a bureaucracy defending itself, an institution employing a lot of people who are then going to vote for more of the same, and crooks basically bleeding the whole thing dry. It becomes that ball of worms,
Right.
And that's what's happened.
Yeah, the Potemkin village, I'm sure you're familiar with. But I forget exactly who Potemkin was, but he was Soviet, and we see this over and over again when Xi, what's his name, full name, President Xi, China. He comes over to San Francisco, and all the feces are gone, all the homeless are gone, and the place is all painted up and so forth, and everything's clean and wonderful for a little bit. All these kind of show things. The Potemkin villages were just kind of, fake facades, and everything kind of looks good temporarily, but really the money's gone elsewhere. The Soviet model is just is there. The old expression was, from on the workers' side, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work, and the managers, we are getting paid and we don't have to work, so we'll just kind of shuffle around the papers and everything's good within the inner circle. It seems like there's kind of this aspect from the WEF and whatnot, where they can just kind of pontificate at Davos and have nice meals, fly in, take the jets, all the stuff that other people can't do. It just seems kind of like a kind of a cabal, kind of a sadistic aspect where others should suffer, and you are doing the Lord's work because you have some greater vision, unproved and whatnot. Just amazing. The default position for humanity may be monarchical. We got rid of kings and queens. You kind of have a figurehead version thereof, but the spots get replaced anyway. Our bureaucracy is the modern day monarchy. I know many people who work for the federal government and city and local government, state, whatnot, and they don't work that much. They don't work that hard. Yeah. They can stay at home. They have, usually one or two other jobs they can juggle. Most of them doing some kind of real estate stuff on the side or during work hours. And the whole tenor, if you go into any of your local city hall buildings, you'll find that it's not the same as going to HubSpot. Or a place that, working on a profit motive, or, standard insurance agency and so forth. There's just kind of a whole level of sloth and indolence and kind of an entitlement, and they have the stuff that you don't. They have the ability, usually enforced at the end of a gun locally and during government and whatnot, to do the stuff that they do, and they get away with it. And I guess you need somebody there as a figurehead. You need somebody to kind of hold the marriage licenses, the deeds for your property, whatever. You need some neutral party, but inevitably it gets perverted. And these transnationals. So I mean, what's weird for me is that people are on this presumption that they're all good because they're far away. It's kind of we presume somebody has an English accent, they're smarter. And I don't know if that goes in the converse. I don't think it does in the UK for American accents, but we have this presumption that somebody's better than us. Somebody's taller, they're better than us. And I don't know. This kind of thing seems to fit so well or too well into the human genome, where people accede to lockdowns, they accede to these experts and whatnot. There's knowledge that somehow is out there, that these transnational WHO knows more about illness than say an independent physician would. It just, I mean, are we?
Well, I mean, the whole COVID debacle and this kind of fetishization of expertise. But only, of course, the expertise of the people who are saying the same things as the government and the state. The experts and there were many experts in COVID who were saying the opposite. And, and it was truly bizarre to see people arguing, well, you're clearly a moron because you're ignoring expert advice. But I'm selectively ignoring all of the experts who speak against this official line. And I'm kind of sort of saying that Robert Malone doesn't know what he's talking about, or that any of the other kind of major critics of COVID policy who do have a background in that field were somehow idiots to be ignored. But people were simultaneously advancing the argument you're a fool for ignoring the experts. I'm wiser and smarter than you because I'm deferring all of my thinking to the experts, but I'm also letting those experts tell me to ignore these other experts. You know, the kind of absurdity, the logical absurdity of it all didn't really get through to people at that time. And it's a bit similar now that we're seeing, you know, with these investigations of what's happening in America. And you've got seriously, you know, people seriously arguing what right does this 20-year-old Doge genius, who is a computer expert by any definition of the term, what right do they have to do an audit? Well, they've been empowered by the president to do an audit, so they do have the constitutional right to do it. The executive order gives them that right. But it's also the case that, the very people saying, how can you let these young kids do this? How can they be experts? At the same time, saying that 25-year-old David Hogg is going to have one of the senior most posts, you know, and he's got no expertise. He doesn't come across as particularly intelligent on anything. You know, he just happened to be one of the, in a gun incident.
Yeah, no, in favor of young people, I will say that, you know, the genius is in the young. The ability to, your kind of CPU's working a little bit higher speed. There's a little bit less, atherosclerosis kind of clogging things up there and whatnot, and you have a fresher approach and you're faster. If you want to watch some good speed chess, you know, you can watch some 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds just like, kill anybody I know. I mean, not all of them, obviously, but the ones who are good at that thing, you know, they get good really fast. You know, if you watch youth tennis or whatever, 14, 15-year-old boys, they're just like, wow, it's unbelievable. So, you know, there's kind of an expertise. And if you go to, any of your law firms, it's really the young, non-partnered members who are doing all the work, and everybody else puts their name on it. So the young have probably always been doing the work, and other people take credit for it. You know, when Nancy Pelosi puts out a budget, she didn't write any of that crap.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bunch of
and part of this process of this kind of, institutionalization of fraud is that the America had become something of a gerontocracy. That you look at the ages of the Democrat leadership, and they're all more ancient than Trump is. The key figures in the top of who've been directing the Democrat Party and kind of fetishizing youth. They're repeating ideas that were first expressed in the 1960s when they themselves were genuinely young. You know, even the fetishization of youth is an old idea. There is this kind of hypocrisy that runs through the whole thing. And when you've got a very, very corrupt system and a very fraudulent system, which is what globalism is, it's a system of stasis. So you get these kind of very elderly people applying the ideas of the 1960s and the solutions of the 1950s to modernity. And, and their idea of what modernity is kind of, we're fighting for black rights, or we're fighting for gay rights. And they've kind of like not even noticed that those were obtained. And then we move past that.
Right. It's kind of like we have, charities here, like the Susan Komen Race for the Cure for breast cancer and whatnot. Breast cancer is a bad thing. I don't want anybody I know to have it, but the mortality has gone down vastly because this case finding early on. But none of these organizations will ever go out of business because they're never going to announce pretty much if you get regular mammograms, you're not going to die from breast cancer, which is I think. And maybe there'll be something better down the road, and there will be. There's things better than mammograms already. They have MRI, and things are going to progress. But people have this kind of static view of things. They don't think they're ever going to be any solutions. There was I don't know if you ever heard of the bet between Julian Simon and I think Paul Ehrlich. It was done, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s. And Julian Simon was an economist at George Mason, and Ehrlich was, kind of like Greta Thunberg with a PhD. And the Earth is going to die, and so they made a classic bet of commodities. They had a basket of commodities, and Simon's presumption was that in 10 years the value would all in real dollars would go down, and Ehrlich was this on kind of scarcity theory, and so he picked out titanium and this and that, various things, corn, wheat, whatever, food, everything was going to be more dear over time. And Simon not only won the aggregate, but I think he won every single silo that Ehrlich got to pick. So they put their money, whatever, but Ehrlich picked the 10 things that were going to be more expensive because population, running out of stuff and whatnot. And what he missed out was, yes, we do run out of stuff, but we wind up using different stuff. We don't make the cars out of as much metal anymore. We use other stuff. And so you can kind of, make your car out of sand. There's a lot of sand. The smartphone I have, is made out of basically, the glass is sand, the stuff, a lot of rocks in there and whatnot. And we figure stuff out, we work things out over time. So the kind of the ingenuity aspect is always missing. And even if you were to stipulate all the worst parts of the kind of the green, miasma, nightmare, whatnot, humans are still going to adapt. They're still going to figure stuff out. The planet's been colder at various times, it's been warmer, it's been foggier, it's been this and that. People are moving around. From what I can tell, there are people living in almost every climate outside of, the Arctic kind of conditions and whatnot. And people figure stuff out. They wear less in the hot weather, they wear more in the cold weather, and so forth. And there are people everywhere, up with people. People are kind of clever. Anyway.
It's a very static idea of human ingenuity, and it's also a very odd idea that the only people who will ever come up with solutions are lifelong bureaucrats who have never had to have an original thought in their working life. And they're the ones that we should, trust the most to come up with the solutions to supposedly radical problems. It's like, what, really? Is that who's going to do it? Or is it going to be done much better by, 20-year-old computer geniuses? I think probably the second group are more likely to come up with the radical solutions that actually work.
Yeah, no, it's a funny thing. I spent time in the 80s. We took our bicycles, my wife and I, and we went behind the Iron Curtain, which existed back then. So we bicycled through Hungary, Czechoslovakia was called, and we went to East Germany, and we were later in Yugoslavia and whatnot. But we saw lots of places, because we bicycled. We went to places you wouldn't go to by bus, train, etc. And the pollution level was enormous. The kind of the thickness of the cloud of pollution, because they didn't have the luxury of caring about the stuff that the West did. People don't realize that these are all kind of luxury issues that make comprise the green agenda, and most of all these other kind of penances and indulgences, whatever the word, that are involved in all these NGOs, all come off the back of a productive society. And in the meanwhile, they want to kind of Luddite the society from which they exist, and there's not really any genuine pathway to globalize the places they idolize. Burma.
Yeah,
Myanmar.
The trouble is that the luxury beliefs of the ruling class are the instant harms to the working class. Everything that makes a kind of modern Marxist style elite who have this kind of weird mix of kind of Marxist ideas on culture, on race, on gender, on sexuality, and on the state being the kind of primary architect of everything, and the people to whom we should defer everything. They have that kind of Marxist set of ideas united to self-enrichment and powerful corporations and, assigning the money to themselves. So it's a kind of, it's a merger of capitalist greed and Marxist ideology, which is very, very bizarre. But it ends up with all of the things that a globalist who has this kind of mixture of elements, who always comes from the upper class and he's always affluent themselves. Everything that they believe in, because of this strange mix of influences, is harmful to ordinary people in their own nations, because the money to save Africa comes from Arkansas. The money to employ thousands and thousands of people, supposedly doing these good deeds and supposedly saving the world, comes from your own populace that you're increasingly neglecting and increasingly don't give a damn about. And that's what we see most starkly when, for example, globalists directed the responses under the Biden administration to actual disasters in the US. And you've got, the people of Carolina are left to freeze in the cold, whilst the same leadership is saying we're sending, another $1 trillion to Ukraine, or we're sending more and more money to solve climate change in Africa.
Right.
Because all of their idea of what's good and how you're a good person comes not from helping your own people, but by helping everyone else.
Right.
And because they themselves are comfortable within that system, and some of the money's being diverted to them, everyone they know, all of their friends, are not the people who are going to be shivering in the cold in Carolina, or not the people who are going to be directed into a fire in Hawaii, not the people who are going to be, struggling to pay the food bills while their government wastes trillions of dollars. They're not those people, so they don't care.
Yeah, they love humanity but hate people.
Yeah, it's very, very true. And there's a brilliant Dickens example of this, because he gives a character who I forget the name of the individual character, but it's just absolutely brilliant, and it foretells what would become the kind of official policy of our governments under globalist leadership, because he has a character whose children are starving, literally starving. She doesn't feed her own kids, but she's engaged in countless charities, and she's like considers herself a philanthropist, and she's donating.
Angelina Jolie? Is her name happen to be Madonna?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is exactly that kind of thing.
Smith, I don't know. There's a bunch of these, or Mia Farrow could be. There's kind of this nest of child acquisitive stars, who wind up, saving the world, and whatnot. But their own homes, from what I gather, tend to be less than bucolic, ideal, peaceful, and whatnot. And a lot of the kids come out, through some
the kids under their care are damaged, and I mean, there's a more obvious one than that.
Charlize Theron.
Charlize Theron saying, all my kids are trans, all my friends' kids are trans, everyone must be trans, aren't they? And I learned from them. And he said, well, no, actually, they've learned from you, and you have your crackpot ideas. You've installed them in your kids, and that's why there's this disproportionate number of trans kids in your social circle, because you're using your kids abusively in a Munchausen syndrome type way as kind of ultimate fashion accessories. You're not caring about their actual mental health and development. You're damaging that by pandering to delusions that you've partly inflicted on them.
Yeah, they've kind of mistook the word transparent. To become transparent. I'd like to talk about the article you had out today, and I'll put it up. I think it's kind of the self-hatred, the Anglophobia within England. I'll give you one. This is a little anecdote, but about maybe 8 years ago, I was traveling from Armenia to here, U.S., and stopped in Qatar. And on the first leg of the flight, it was like middle of the night, kind of, 3 or 4 a.m. We left Yerevan, and I'm sitting next to a guy who's an intelligent German guy, young, he's like late 20s, one of these intelligent 20 or somethings, and he's apparently runs Qatar Airways in a sense. He's the guy doing the books and whatnot. And I asked him a lot of what's going on in that place, because I'd been in Qatar on the way over, and there's the guys in the big the kind of I can't remember the Arab name for the anyway, there's like the hereditary rulers of Qatar, and they're the top. And so they're part of every company. You can't have a company there without one of those guys owning it and as the CEO and so forth. But the place is run by Europeans. Qatar Airways, they're doing their schedule, their computers, and all the things, the HR, whatever, the whole place. And he's making a good living. But I asked him, about Germany and whatnot. And he just, Germany's a horrible place, horrible place, terrible. I'm like, yeah, but it made you, and you're running this airline for another country, which can't get people like you to run it from themselves. Like how, you have a place where, the Germans are still, valued for their ability to, make things run on time, as important to an airline and whatnot. And he's like, well, but what about the Nazis? I get it. My people didn't do well under the Nazis. And so, but that wasn't you. You didn't do that. And your parents didn't do it. And so forth. So it's like, but drummed into it at school. So I just don't know if that's really kind of a productive way to be running a nation, a country. And this is kind of like suffusement of self-hatred across the board in Europe. And Europe has, that's the place people want to travel. Nobody wants to travel. I mean, some people have to travel through Qatar. I don't know, people really want to go there, maybe indoors, so forth. But a lot, all these other places are never going to be on your travel dreams. Nobody really. Yeah,
and even if you look at, even if you look at the Gulf states and you look at the, fabulously wealthy Muslim nations, the people who go there aren't going there to experience Muslim culture. They're not going there because, wow, I'd love to. Even at its most romantic, say Arab culture at its most romantic, they're not really going there to kind of ride on a camel through the desert. They're not going there to read the Quran. They go there because using slave labor and oil proceeds, mega rich sheikhs essentially have made these nations playgrounds, and they've made them playgrounds in a very kind of commercialized Western sense. So people fly in, and they go to Qatar, or they go to even parts of Saudi, or they go to Bahrain or Kuwait, and the places they visit are holiday locations with gigantic, vast hotels, and it's like visiting Las Vegas and saying you've experienced the whole of America. You've experienced what's being sold to you as this place, and you've experienced none of its reality. But it's kind of a very Western reality of the kind of like good times and bright lights, and that's all built, has been built by these kind of still very medieval style societies, on the back of slave labor, because like when we had the World Cup out, the Football World Cup, in one of those nations, nobody seemed to object to the fact that these kind of fabulously beautiful locations that have been built and these huge stadiums that looked fantastic. Yes, it was all kind of well built. Thousands and thousands of what were essentially slave labor people died in the building of all of that, and we just all sent people out there to have a good time. And these kind of these organizations like the FIFA or whatever for football, that will grandstand about racism and say kick racism out of football and have big campaigns, and then who also say we'll be the first to jump on any bandwagon saying they're all Black Lives Matter advocates, all of these organisations, and then they'll go, we'll send it to, because it's a Middle Eastern slave owning country, and that's okay. So the whole hypocrisy is massive on these things.
Yeah, I like to kind of veer a little bit towards the hypocrisy within the UK, and your Anglophobia article kind of talks about this. I mean, the way that England really kind of has its own hatred to the extent it's sacrificing its youth. It ignored the Rotherham. I think grooming is kind of the wrong word for it. Rape cycles.
Yeah, I mean, grooming gang it became the standard word, but it's really it's a way of describing it that is too polite, and that exists to be too polite as well. That was deliberately created to downplay what was happening, because these were child rape gangs and they were on an industrial scale, and they had thousands upon thousands of victims, potentially up to 1 million victims over 30 years. And and that's the industrial scale of the gang rape and the torture and the abuse of almost exclusively, there were some Sikh victims, but almost exclusively white victims, who were betrayed, abandoned, completely ignored by the British ruling class and the British establishment, by British police, by British judges, by British politicians, because the victims were white working class and the abusers were mainly Pakistani descended, obviously brown skinned rapists. And the clear fact is that the worst, the most horrific racism in British history, with the largest number of victims and the most disgusting crimes, is that fairly recent industrial scale, still going on, rape of white children by immigrant communities. And the people like Keir Starmer did everything they could, our present Prime Minister did everything they could, and are still doing everything they can to downplay it, to pretend that it wasn't a big event, and all the ways in which they would be absolutely screaming if this was something that happened to, say, a black community in the US, or that happened to, if it had been the other way around and there were gangs of predatory white men abusing Muslims in the UK, this would have been an enormous scandal immediately, and all the press would have been running with it. Instead, they spent 30 years denying it, and and we've got horrific instances of, for example, victims who went forward and they were literally picked up from the police station, ignored by the police when they went in to report these crimes against them, and picked up by grooming gangs from the police station. And it's literally like, one of the most horrific things in the Jeffrey Dahmer serial killer case was that, the fact that one of the victims escaped and was then handed back to Jeffrey Dahmer to kill, because he wasn't believed by the authorities. They thought Jeffrey Dahmer comes along and says, sorry, everyone, this guy's a lunatic, I'm taking care of him. Yeah. And the serial killer's believed and the victim isn't. Well, that's what happened again and again and again.
It's a strange delusion. I was at a Yale Club meeting in Boston, 2011, I think, and the guest was Janet Wu, and she was a TV person. She's I guess a Yale graduate, and she was a TV talking head locally, and I think some national news or whatever. And she was up there, and at that point, it was right after Tahrir Square, Egypt, and Lara Logan, I think Australian, anyway, journalist, she was groped and raped in Tahrir Square. She was reporting. She was surrounded by an enclave of Egyptian men, and she was molested and passed around and all that kind of stuff. And nobody really denies this happened. And I think some of it was caught on video. And Janet Wu had this thought bubble during the kind of Q&A part. She was asked about women journalists and whatnot, and she said, "Well, I don't know why she even." But her thought bubble was like, "Well, that's not really a hate crime because she's white and they're Muslim."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I kind of interceded, like, did you really just say that? I mean, you're like all this, intersectionality is crazy stuff. Like, she's a woman, she's looking out for women journalists, she wants more women journalists, all that kind of stuff. But it clearly is some vulnerabilities to be a woman journalist. You're applying your own set of standards that maybe work in New York City in 2011, and maybe in certain other places in the UK. But you went to Egypt, and you're kind of, as you mentioned, kind of going up against the Iron Age standards and whatnot of women as property and so forth. And it's like, I mean, in their context, maybe there was no crime. Maybe there, according to the Muslim Brotherhood, leadership at the time, there's no crime per se. She was exposing herself and so forth. But to have Janet Wu adopt that, and this is kind of like, I think, exactly, or it's redolent of what's happening in the UK, or had been happening even back then.
Yeah, I mean, one of the features of globalism is because it's not just, it begins with this kind of well, there's trade arguments for it, and these international organizations do good and all that, and we're being kind and empathetic, but it ends up as a kind of fetishization of the other, to the detriment and to the hatred of your own people, and the way you mark your sophistication, your education, your enlightenment, your social status is by hating your own people, and not caring if they are raped, not caring if they are abused, and everybody who supports an open US southern border, for example, gets to that position not caring at all about the Lake and Rileys of the world. They get to that position not caring about their own people, and the empathy for the other overrides any kind of compassion or empathy or awareness of what's happening to your existing citizens, what's happening to the people that your government is supposed to actually protect.
Right.
And in England, this has gone on for a long time, because England has been one of the biggest victims of globalization on the planet. The English white working class have been more mistreated than almost anyone else you can think of, because this kind of gang rape of their children that was endorsed by the political system for decades. It's not happened. Thankfully, we've not seen the scale of that elsewhere. But I suspect there's a fair bit of it going on in France, for example, at the moment. But with their Muslim population. But we haven't seen the same scale in elsewhere. We certainly haven't in the US. Although there's, in my article I mentioned there's, estimated 500,000 racial assaults on white people in the US every year. And the fact is, if you actually look into the statistics behind this, white people are massively disproportionately more likely to be racially attacked. They're more likely to be the victims of violence by another ethnic group than any other ethnic group are. Even if you look at the positives, if you look at who has the kind of kindest and the nicest racial attitudes, recent polling in the US shows that when you poll white people, they're racially blind. They literally do not express a preference for white people, whereas every other group expresses a preference for their own group, in polling. And it is quite, by quite large margins. If you poll black people in America, they say black people are the best. You poll, Hispanics in America, they say Hispanic people are the best. You poll white people and they say everyone's the same. And yet it's the white people who are portrayed as the ones who are the kind of racist bigots in all our culture, all our
Yeah, and
how we
you mentioned kind of the popular cultural stuff, uh, and you kind of focus on Mel Gibson against the British, but it seems like a recurring trope that in order to get ahead, there was a Broadway show, how to get ahead in business without really trying, with Robert Morris, a very successful musical. But how to get ahead in literature and or the arts and or politics without really trying is to just spit on your own. It seems like,
oh yeah, yeah,
and mind you, I don't necessarily, I think, you don't necessarily want to see it as your own, but clearly there are people that you care about on a personal basis. But part of this kind of, again, transmutation, to use the word as a foreboding, is that this kind of birthright aspect has been taken away from people's even sensibilities. Like some political type person, and I think a state senator, I'm not sure I think she's a state rep or whatever. She's like, I hate Donald Trump so much. I'm was she self neutering? She's going to have her tubes tied.
yeah, the one who sterilized herself.
Yeah, she sterilized herself. But that seems to be like, I mean, she's doing that in a literal sense, but everybody else seems to be doing it kind of metaphorically, like, not getting married, having, childless marriages, having, kind of promoting the essentially the castration of their own children once they have them. And, there's very little impetus towards carrying on one's lineage, which is an odd thing. I mean, it's a weird, I'm not the greatest person on earth, but I like myself. It's like, until people disabuse me of that. I mean, people have tried to disabuse me and abuse me of that notion and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, I love my kids. I wish them, to go forth and be fruitful and multiply and add and subtract and do all the other things that German kid could do. But I'm not sure he ever will, aside from in the office. There seems to be, along the feminist ideal as well, to kind of become guys and do all that other stuff in the office, and maybe work in an airline in Qatar and whatnot. And this kind of aspect of home and hearth is been taken away. It's some kind of how hateful to be a mom, to be raising a family, to have more than the Hollywood commercial ideal of that single kid. There were commercials in the Super Bowl yesterday, and his greatest thing ever, a guy, was his child. But there's one. There's kind of
one, yeah. And of course, the rest of the world isn't functioning by this. And when you import the rest of the world, they're not functioning by this. And it's true. There's a in the green movement. There was this huge element in the green movement, going back years and years and years, of misanthropy, hatred of human beings. Essentially, human beings are a cancer on the earth, and we're going to use up all its resources, and we do nothing but pollute and excrete and kill and maim other animals. And we are evil. Our existence is evil. And under globalism, that's essentially what you're being told. Particularly if about your own citizens and your own people, but about humanity as a whole too, which is what makes the whole kind of, we're the empathetic side of things and we're the kind and caring side of things even more ironic, because fundamentally these people don't like anyone else. Right. The average globalist will say, I'm a citizen of the world, and go around hating all their own citizens.
Yeah, no, it's a funny thing.
And they will also hate humanity as a whole. They will say, we are a cancer on the earth. We're doing all this polluting. We're doing all this damaging the environment. It's better if we don't have kids. It's better if there's no more of us. Right. And it's a truly horrific attitude to adopt. And it's an inhumane attitude that claims to be empathetic.
So I read Paul Johnson ages ago, and it was really kind of a lodestar moment for me. He started out as a Marxist, my understanding is, and He wrote Modern Times, and then he wrote Intellectuals, I believe. But into Intellectuals, this is kind of a standard theme. Karl Marx is obviously, prototype of this, but Rousseau and they were all like miserable people who they couldn't, they borrowed money, never gave it back. They abandoned their own kids. They mistreated their women, whatever. They lived horribly, and their ideas are somehow templated. I have personal examples. I mean, we have Bernie Sanders here, but on I have various extended family, whatever. It seems like the furthest left, the further left people are, generally speaking, their own kind of situations are on a physical basis, oftentimes just a mess, just to walk into their homes and whatnot. And there's kind of like a strange attitude, and yet they're projecting, world domination. So, I kind of feel oftentimes it's a politics of envy.
It's also it's also the politics of psychopathy, because I'm not the origin of this idea. I can't remember the name of the guy who is, but there was a brilliant article on cluster B personality disorders.
Yeah,
and and how they are, and I cite this in my latest book.
I've read about a quarter of it, and I remember that was an interesting part.
Yeah, and it's a really, really kind of fascinating thing, and people who get to a passionate level of disagreement on politics will tend to pathologize the other side. So they will call us nuts, and we'll call them nuts. But the interesting thing is, if you go away and you ask people if they've ever had engagements with mental health services, if they've ever suffered from anxiety and depression, if they've ever self-harmed, if they've if they've ever shown traits of a narcissistic personality disorder, every kind of mental health indicator you can think of, self-identified, asking these people, do you have these things? It's been repeated in both by kind of left-wing people trying to analyze this, and by right-wing people.
They keep asking the question because they hope for a different
answer. They hope for a different answer.
Every time
the result comes back that there is a disproportionate level of mental health issues on the left than there is on the right. Republican voters are mentally healthier. This is a literal fact. That if you want to trust the science and follow the science, this is what has been revealed. Both clinical studies and clinical diagnoses and the polling on this and kind of self-revelation on this has shown that the left is far more predisposed to mental health issues than the right is. But the thing that happened is that those were the people who were also controlling society and at the top of society, because they were very good at kind of moving through the institutions, the long march through the institution, the kind of Gramsci style aim. They did all that. They got to the top of society. They got society following their ideas, and lo and behold, society itself and everyone else became more mentally unhealthy. Because this is mentally unhealthy people telling us that their way of thinking was the normal and the new normal.
Yeah, no, it's a funny thing. I mean, ultimately, a lot of the school teacher proposition is that they're going to take kids and they're going to take them en masse and transmute them when they don't necessarily want to or have their own kids. So, the left has fewer kids than the right, but they're going to they're happy because they have the abattoir of your soul.
I mean, this idea that the people who believe that the human race are a cancer, polluting the planet, and that everything is so vile that they don't want kids themselves, should be then put in charge of your kids is a very bizarre one. But unfortunately, that's the situation we've been in.
All right. So we're kind of rounding out the hour here. I want to let you carry on with life such as it is. I mean, I'm sure you can really call it life anymore in the UK, but there you have it.
Yeah.
And but I wish you luck, and I'll send you care packages.
Yeah,
I'm not,
well, what we need is exactly what you've had. We need this kind of rollback that happily America is now experiencing.
all right.
But
So
my book gives tips of people for surviving until that happens.
yeah,
But I think it's still relevant in the US as well, because obviously there's lots of blue states, and there's lots of people that will be carrying on with the madness,
right.
despite the best efforts of Trump and Musk.
Well, yes. So one of my favorite political quotes is H.L. Mencken. About 100 years ago, he said, "Democracy is the concept by which the people vote for what they want, and they deserve to get it, good and hard."
Yeah.
So here's my question. So the thesis is that we wouldn't have this Trump 2.0, but for no pun on the but for the fact that we were kind of received some damage in that region posteriorly through the last 4 years. So that made everyone smarter, and Trump got smarter in meanwhile, because he's able to kind of so forth. So you didn't want Rishi Sunak to continue, and a lot of people agreed, and so forth. And so now you're getting your Biden phase, but worse, I think, even.
Yeah.
You don't have the federalist system we have, and you don't have as much rights reserved to the states. You got full bore parliamentary, kind of dictatorship of the people, and you got 4.5 more years of it, or something like that.
Yeah.
Did you make the right decision? I've asked you this before. Did you make the right decision? Should people have consolidated around the lesser evil? Is getting 4 years of labor, is that kind of labor, to quote the Germans, is that, Arbeit going to macht frei?
Yeah.
For you, is it going to make you, is the work going to make you free?
I hope that there will be an effect, and it's looking like there may be, but I hope there'll be effect along the lines of the US after the Biden years, which is that it will just get so bad that the populace at large won't tolerate it any
The government
longer.
doesn't have to fall; they can just hold on. It's going to be against interest to call an election, because they don't think they're going to do better. You generally guys call an election.
Well, I mean, I'm sitting in Essex in the UK, right, and which is the county, like our equivalent of the state, although they're much tinier. So the county of Essex that I live in, we've had our local elections. So for our councils, which are our local branch of government, we've had them just supposedly delayed by a year, and they're consulting on doing a new framework and it's essentially because Labour would have lost massively, and that Labour have immediately become very, very unpopular in power because of the things they're doing, and because of that Anglophobia we talked about beforehand. People are noticing it now, they're feeling it, it's hurting them. And although long term it might have the positive effect of getting us a government that is less Anglophobic for a start, it's hurting them here and now. That has meant that reform have surged in the polls, and for the first time, reform have passed. The Conservative Party and the Labour Party are ahead in the polls, but in my region, they would have won local elections if they were held now, and that's been prevented by the Labour Party just saying we're not going to have these local elections, we're not going to have them. So unfortunately, under any kind of globalist rule, the traditional limits and what you expect to happen aren't obeyed, because globalists, like the Marxists from which they're derived, they don't obey the rules, and they only expect you to obey the rules. They don't obey the rules themselves.
So getting back to the central question, is there any remorse over booting the Conservatives last round?
No, because the Conservatives had become completely useless and and had to go. We couldn't keep voting for the lesser of two evils. But would I prefer now an alliance between the Conservatives and the and Reform Party to make sure that whatever happens, we don't get another term of Labour, yes, I would prefer that now. But I don't regret voting Reform rather than Conservative, because the Conservatives needed a lesson as well, and they've been failing to protect their own people for far too long.
Yeah. So if we make after Canada and Greenland and where else, if we make the UK our 53rd state, how do you feel?
Honest to God, if I went down to the coast and there's a US invasion fleet in the English Channel, I would scream with delight now, to be honest, because you cannot have a shred of English patriotism and want this current Labour government to continue, and almost anything removing it is preferable. I'd happily become the 53rd state, or the 51st, rather than have this government. Because they hate English people, as I said in my article, and this is what happens with globalists everywhere. They hate their own people, and they do everything they can against the interests of their own people.
Yeah. Well, in the interest of our people who want to buy your book, this is Gates of Hell. And let's see if I can pull up the title. Why Bill Gates is the most dangerous man in the world. Daniel Jupp. And,
yeah, even more than Keir Starmer. And
here's your essay in Jupplandia, named after the man himself. You can go find this. It's at Jupplandia Substack. And we if things work out, we'll rename the UK after we take it over.
Yes.
Catchy. And if people want to help support my work, they can go buy my book. I have a couple other books out shortly, but this is the one that's out right now. It's about something that's unrelated to what we've spoken about. But it does speak to the fact that you shouldn't always believe everything you hear. The experts are maybe they have some expertise, but they also have, like human beings, they got self-interest, and the gravy train has been good to them, and they don't really, to change metaphors, they don't want to upset the apple cart of the gravy train.
yeah. To mix metaphors. Yeah. I should say as well before I go that my new book comes out hopefully by the end of this month. So F the Planet will be out by the end of this month, hopefully.
Yeah, let's see. So I have it here. Well, I already showed it. So
yeah, I haven't got a release date yet, but it will be very soon.
Where can we find it?
That will be from Bombardier Books, who are based in the US, and so you can get it from them. It will also be available on Amazon, and you can even order it from bookshops if you supply the ISBN.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. Hopefully things will work out for all of us, and that'll be it for today.